Corporate fraud is a serious crime that harms businesses, investors, consumers, and the public. It involves illegal or unethical activities done by a company or an employee of the company to gain an advantage. These activities may include falsifying financial records, misrepresenting products or services, insider trading, or paying bribes. The Department of Justice, DOJ, has a dedicated fraud section that investigates and prosecutes complex white-collar crime cases throughout the country. The fraud section has expertise in handling sophisticated fraud schemes that are often hard to detect and involve multiple parties and jurisdictions. The fraud section also plays a key role in developing and implementing policies and initiatives to prevent, deter, and punish corporate fraud. The fraud section has 4 units that focus on different types of corporate fraud: the Healthcare Fraud Unit, the Securities and Financial Fraud Unit, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act (FCPA) Unit, and the Market Integrity and Major Frauds Unit. Each unit works closely with other DOJ components, such as the U.S. Attorney's offices, the Criminal Division's Money Laundering and Asset Recovery Section, and the Antitrust Division, as well as with other federal and state agencies, such as the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, and the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS. The fraud section uses various tools and strategies to investigate and prosecute corporate fraud, such as data analytics. The fraud section leverages data analysis techniques to identify patterns and anomalies in large datasets that may indicate fraud. For example, the fraud section uses data analytics to target health care providers who submit fraudulent claims to Medicare and Medicaid, or financial institutions that engage in mortgage fraud or money laundering. Whistleblowers. The fraud section encourages whistleblowers to report corporate fraud to the DOJ under various statutes, such as the False Claims Act, FCA, which allows private individuals to sue on behalf of the government for fraud against federal programs or contracts, or the Dodd-Frank Act, which provides incentives and protections for whistleblowers who report securities or commodities fraud to the SEC or the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, CFTC. Cooperation. The fraud section offers incentives for companies and individuals to cooperate with its investigations and prosecutions. For example, under the DOJ's Corporate Enforcement Policy, which applies to FCPA cases and other corporate fraud cases at the discretion of the fraud section, companies that voluntarily disclose misconduct, fully cooperate with the DOJ, and timely and appropriately remediate may receive a declination of prosecution or a reduced penalty. Similarly, under the DOJ's Individual Accountability Policy, also known as the Yates Memo, companies that seek cooperation credit must provide all relevant facts about individuals involved in corporate misconduct. Enforcement actions. The fraud section pursues various types of enforcement actions against corporate fraudsters, such as criminal charges, deferred prosecution agreements, DPAs, non-prosecution agreements, NPAs, civil settlements, injunctions, disgorgement, forfeiture, restitution, fines, penalties, and monitors. In 2022, the fraud section achieved significant results in its fight against corporate fraud. According to its year-end review report, the fraud section resolved 7 corporate cases involving over $2 billion paid to U.S. and foreign criminal and civil authorities declined prosecution for 2 companies pursuant to the Corporate Enforcement Policy, charged 280 individuals with corporate fraud offenses, convicted 342 individuals of corporate fraud offenses. Some of the notable cases handled by the fraud section in 2022 include a $1.4 billion global resolution with Airbus SE for FCPA violations involving bribery schemes in multiple countries, a $1 billion settlement with Wells Fargo and Company for consumer abuse practices related to its sales of automobile insurance policies and mortgage loans, a $225 million civil settlement with Endeavor Solutions for FCPA violations involving false marketing claims about its opioid addiction treatment drug Suboxone, a $145 million criminal penalty against Practice Fusion Inc. for FCA violations involving soliciting and receiving kickbacks from a major opioid company in exchange for implementing clinical decision support alerts in its electronic health records software, a $50 million criminal penalty against Novartis Hellas S.A.C.I. for FCPA violations involving bribery schemes in Greece, a $49 million criminal penalty against Samsung Heavy Industries Company Ltd. for FCPA violations involving bribery schemes in Brazil, a $25 million criminal penalty against Sargent Marine Inc. for FCPA violations involving bribery schemes in Brazil, Venezuela, and Ecuador. One of the most recent and shocking cases of corporate fraud involving plastic medical devices was exposed by the Department of Justice in March. The founder and former CEO of StemWave LLC, Laura Perryman, was arrested and charged with conspiracy and healthcare fraud for selling fake implants to patients with chronic pain. StemWave was a medical device company that claimed to offer a non-opiate alternative for pain management. It marketed a system that consisted of an implantable electrode array that stimulated nerves, an external battery, and a receiver that transmitted energy between them. The system was supposed to deliver electrical currents to nerves outside the spinal cord and reduce pain. However, according to the DOJ, Perryman devised a scheme to create and sell a completely non-functional version of the receiver that was made entirely of plastic and did not transmit any electricity. She did this because some doctors complained that the original receiver was too long to fit in some patients' bodies. Perryman offered them a shorter receiver that could be cut to size, but she did not tell them that it was useless. As a result, hundreds of patients were implanted with fake plastic devices that had no medical efficacy at all. They paid thousands of dollars for the procedures and suffered unnecessary risks and complications. The DOJ also alleged that Perryman instructed her employees to lie about the devices and falsify records to conceal the fraud. The DOJ estimated that Perryman and StemWave defrauded federal health care programs such as Medicare for millions of dollars by billing them for the fake devices. StemWave agreed to pay $10 million to avoid criminal prosecution and settle a civil whistleblower lawsuit. Perryman faced up to 30 years in prison if convicted. This case illustrates how some corporate fraudsters can exploit vulnerable patients and abuse the healthcare system for their own gain. It also shows how the DOJ can crack down on such fraudsters and hold them accountable for their crimes.